I made it. President Gillespie, trustees, faculty, staff, families, friends, and especially the graduates of 1989, I congratulate you. I thank you for the invitation to share with you on this occasion. I understand you had something to do with my invitation. If you didn't, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. I'm honored to stand with you for a few moments on this pleasant summit. This is a rare occasion. I know some people get a little jaded about commencements, the repetition year after year, but it is a rare moment. It is a time when the church and the academy, sometimes at odds, are unusually close to each other. It is a time when the enthusiasm with which you came and the knowledge which you have acquired join in happy union. It is a time when that which you must do and that which you want to do not stand at any distance from each other. Now and then, the service of Christ fits our natural inclinations, and we're able to please both Christ and ourselves. And this moment is very much like that. I want to say something about a pressing temptation facing the church. But I will do so by speaking to you about Jesus of Nazareth. I feel justified in this approach for two reasons. The gospel narratives that tell us about him tell us about ourselves. For it was the church that wrote and preserved and collected and respects as normative the story of Jesus. The church's fingerprints are all over those gospel narratives. I speak of him, I speak about us. Secondly, I feel justified by the fact of the incarnation. For if he became as we are, to speak of him is to speak of ourselves. Jesus, too, was tempted. The Hebrew writer says he was tempted in every way as we are tempted. But the temptations of Jesus seem to have been especially strong, clustered about the subject of his death. How early in his life Jesus thought of his death, we do not know. We have no access to that information. The gospel writers place the thought of his death quite early, as you know. But that doesn't mean that he thought of it that early. It is the tendency of the gospel writers and the church after them to put the shadow of the cross even over the crib. And I notice in some parts of the country it is customary to put a lighted cross on top of a Christmas tree. There was an attempt upon his life when he was still an infant by the very disturbed Herod the Great. And though that attempt was foiled, the reader knows somebody will try again. Matthew chapter 2. Why don't your disciples fast? Well, you don't fast at a party. But the time will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and in that day they will fast. Mark chapter 2. And old Simeon took the baby, 6 weeks old, held him in his arms, and said to Mary, his mother, "Because of this child, a sword will pierce your heart." Luke chapter 2. "Destroy this temple, and I'll build it again in 3 days." He spoke of the temple of his body. John chapter 2. Quite early in the Gospels, but how early in his life? We cannot know. If it was in his youth, I would not be surprised. Young people think about death. You go into any church and sit down in an informal discussion with the young people, and once they trust you, once they know you will take seriously their questions, even high school young people will ask you about death. There's not a one of them who did not have a friend commit suicide or have them killed in a car wreck. They want to know about death. How soon did Jesus think about death? When I began my teaching in the early 60s, my seminary teaching, it was quite common then to talk about Jesus' attempt at suicide. Have you run across that? This was from the middle 60s. This was an interpretation given, an old interpretation resurrected from the early 1800s, that the temptation to leap from the pinnacle of the temple was a temptation to commit suicide. Why don't you get up on the pinnacle of the temple and jump? Move to the center of political power and religious power. Move to the center of where everything is oppressive for the common people, and there make a statement by taking your own life in the presence of all the people, and let your body crash in front of that sacred place as a statement. This is what my students said. And if God wishes it otherwise, God will send angels to take care of you, and you will waft to the ground like a feather from an eagle's wing. Do it, Jesus. And I remember those days as a young professor going to various informal gatherings and sitting on the floor and reading poems about death and the death wish that pervaded just about everything that was done and thought, a self-destructive streak in all of the thinking at that time. It disturbs me now as a kind of sickness, but I recall we sat on the floor and we read Sylvia Plath, the suicide poet. You remember her? "Dying is an art," she said. "I do it exceptionally well. I guess you could say I have a gift."